The trauma bay at Harlow Peak Military Medical Center had seen 100 emergencies, but nothing like this. At 11:47 p.m., a Navy SEAL commander was rushed in on a gurney, his chest torn open, his blood pressure in freefall. 6 special operations soldiers surrounded him, faces tight, weapons concealed under jackets. The lead doctor on duty started barking orders. Monitors screamed, nurses scattered, and then the dying man grabbed the gurney rail, lifted his head off the blood-soaked pillow, and said one word. Not a prayer, not a name. A call sign. Valkyrie. The room stopped. Every doctor, every nurse, every soldier froze, because nobody in that hospital had ever heard that word before. Nobody except the quiet blonde nurse standing in the corner, holding a clipboard she had forgotten to drop. Her face went white. Her hands went still. And for the first time in 2 years, she stopped pretending. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the stories on this channel don't slow down. Hit like if you want more, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the night everything changed. The graveyard shift at Harlow Peak Military Medical Center was supposed to be quiet. That was the word the charge nurse used every single night when she handed off the floor. Quiet. Like saying it out loud would make it true. The hospital sat on the eastern edge of Fort Calderon, a joint-use facility that served both the base population and the surrounding civilian county. 2 trauma bays, 1 surgical suite, a radiology wing that smelled permanently of antiseptic and old carpet. It was the kind of place where careers went to plateau. Not to end, not to flourish, just to level off and stay there. Mara Voss had been leveling off there for 2 years. She finished charting the last vitals update at 11:31 p.m. and tucked the tablet under her arm, moving down the corridor toward the supply room without making a sound. That was something people noticed about her, though they rarely said it directly. The way she moved. Efficient, economical. Not like someone who was tired, but like someone who had trained herself to take up less space than she needed. 31 years old, medium height, blonde hair pulled into a tight braid that never seemed to loosen even at the end of a 12-hour shift. She had a way of standing in a room that made her look like part of the furniture. That was intentional. The supply room was empty when she pushed through the door. She counted gauze rolls by instinct, noted 2 missing IV lines, scribbled a restock request on the paper clipboard that Dr. Gareth Holloway insisted on using because he didn't trust digital systems. She didn't agree with him about much, but the paper clipboard was the least of her problems. Her biggest problem had a name, Dr. Marcus Trent, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Harlow Peak for 11 years. Former Army surgeon, decorated twice, currently in the process of transforming his military record into a personality. He was 47, broad-shouldered, and had the specific kind of confidence that came not from being the best in the room, but from never being challenged by anyone in the room. The nurses called him the wall behind his back, not because he was protective, because he was an obstacle. Mara had learned to navigate around him in the first week. She kept her head down. She charted cleanly. She asked for clarification instead of pointing out when he was wrong, because pointing out when he was wrong in front of an audience produced a reaction that made the rest of the shift miserable for everyone. She was good at her job in ways that he never acknowledged, and occasionally actively obstructed. 2 nights ago, he had pulled her aside after a shift and told her that if she continued to overstep during active procedures, he would move her to day shift administration, stacking files. Booking appointments? A threat dressed up as a professional concern. She had looked him in the eye and said, "Understood, doctor," because fighting him was not worth what fighting him would cost. She was reaching for the last box of sterile gloves when the radio at the nurse's station crackled to life. Not the internal radio, the external channel, the one that only activated when something was coming in from the base. She was back in the corridor before the second transmission finished. The charge nurse, Donna Falk, was already on her feet, her reading glasses pushed up into her graying hair. "Trauma incoming," she said. "Military, special operations transport, ETA 4 minutes. They're not giving specifics." "How many?" "1 patient, but they've got 6 escort personnel." Mara felt something shift in her chest. Not fear. Something older than fear. A kind of alertness that she had spent 2 years trying to bury under routine and paperwork and the deliberate boredom of a quiet hospital on a quiet base. She moved toward the trauma bay and started pulling equipment by memory. Dr. Trent appeared from the physician's lounge 3 minutes later, tucking his coat on, eyes still carrying the residue of whatever he'd been watching on his phone. He scanned the room with the practiced assessment of a man who had learned to look like he was in control, regardless of whether he actually was. "What's coming in?" he asked. "Special ops transport," Donna said. 6 minutes out now. They say the patient is hemodynamically unstable. Get me a blood type if they have one. Start 2 large-bore IVs on arrival. Push saline until I say otherwise." He looked around the bay, cataloging the staff. His eyes landed on Mara for exactly 1 second. "Voss, triage setup. Don't touch the monitors." She was already setting up the triage cart. She didn't answer him. The ambulance bay doors opened at 11:43 p.m., and the controlled chaos of a military trauma arrival came through with the kind of organized intensity that civilian hospitals rarely saw. 6 men in civilian clothes that didn't fit right, too structured at the shoulders, shoes with thick soles, the particular way they scanned exits before they scanned faces. They moved the gurney with professional precision, talking in clipped shorthand that Mara understood without thinking about it. The patient was male, late 40s, broad through the chest. His face was ash gray. His right side was soaked through the trauma dressing in a way that told her the bleeding hadn't been fully controlled in transport. His oxygen saturation was reading 84 on the portable monitor, and she could hear from 5 feet away that his breathing wasn't right, too fast, and with a quality that made the back of her neck tighten. The tallest of the 6 escorts stepped forward and addressed Dr. Trent directly. "Commander Dex Farrow. He took shrapnel during an extraction operation 4 hours ago. Field team got primary hemorrhage controlled, but he deteriorated in transit. That's all I'm authorized to give you." Trent nodded, taking the clipboard from the transport medic. "Bay 2. Let's move." Mara moved with the gurney. She was running the blood pressure cuff before they had the wheels locked, and the number that came back made her jaw set. 74/50. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the patient's neck. She looked at the way his chest moved when he tried to breathe, or rather, the way it didn't move the way it should. Then Commander Dex Farrow opened his eyes. They were brown, unfocused with pain and whatever they'd pushed him with in transport, but they moved around the room with an awareness that the rest of his body couldn't currently afford. He was looking for something, or someone. His lips moved. She almost didn't hear it over the noise of the bay. Dr. Trent was calling out orders. The transport medic was giving vitals. One of the escorts was on a secure phone 3 feet from the door. But she heard it. Valkyrie. A single word. Barely breath. Mara's hand stopped moving. She stood completely still for a second and a half, which was a second and a half longer than she had stood still during any emergency in 2 years. Her clipboard was in her left hand. The blood pressure cuff was in her right. She was looking at Commander Dex Farrow's face, and he was looking directly back at her, and there was nothing unfocused about his eyes anymore. He knew exactly who he was looking for. He had found her. Donna Falk was the one who broke the moment. "Mara, IV setup." Mara moved, but something had already changed in the room, even if nobody else had noticed it yet. She started the first IV line with the economy of someone who has done the procedure in worse conditions than a lit trauma bay. In moving vehicles, in the dark, in the rain, with people shouting at her from every direction. Her hands were steady. They had always been steady when it mattered. The shaking came later, afterward, when the adrenaline burned off and left behind whatever was underneath it. That was private. That was hers. Dr. Trent was assessing the abdominal wound. Shrapnel entry, right lateral, no exit visible. We need imaging before we open him. Or2 is prepping? Prepped and waiting, Donna confirmed. Good. Push the saline, get me blood on standby, and get radiology on the... He's not going to make it to radiology. The room went very quiet. Dr. Trent turned around slowly. He had the expression of a man who was deciding whether what he had just heard was worth responding to, or whether ignoring it would be more effective. Excuse me? Mara was looking at the monitor. His JVP is elevated. Listen to his breath sounds. They're muffled on the left. His pressure is 74/50 and falling. He has tachycardia. The shrapnel wound is a distraction. Nurse Voss. He has cardiac tamponade. Fluid is compressing his heart. The shrapnel may be contributing, but it's not what's killing him right now. If you push saline and send him for imaging, he will arrest before you get the scan." The transport medic had gone very still. One of the escorts, the tall one, had taken a half step into the bay. Dr. Trent's voice was controlled and cold. "You are a floor nurse. You do not diagnose in my trauma bay. I'm telling you what I see. And I'm telling you to step back and let me work." Mara looked at the monitor. The pressure had dropped 3 more points in the time they'd been talking. She looked at Commander Farrow's face. He was still conscious, barely, and he was still watching her. She stepped back. She moved to the edge of the bay, positioned where she could see the monitors and the patient and Dr. Trent, and she said nothing else. Because arguing further in this moment, with Trent at full defensive height and an audience of military escorts who didn't know her from any other hospital employee, would cost more than it would buy. But she was counting, she was watching the numbers, she was waiting. Dr. Trent ordered the saline push. Commander Farrow's blood pressure dropped to 68/42 within 90 seconds. The transport medic, a young guy, maybe 25, with the look of someone recently out of a combat rotation, moved up next to Mara without making it obvious. He was looking at the same numbers she was looking at. He said, very quietly, without turning his head, "You said tamponade." "Yes." "What's the fix?" "Pericardiocentesis. Needle decompression of the pericardial sac. It's not a long-term solution, but it buys time for surgical intervention." The medic was quiet for a moment. "You know how to do that?" Mara didn't answer that question. What she said instead was, "Watch the monitor. When his pressure hits 60, your commander is 30 seconds from arrest." The medic said nothing, but he didn't move away from her. At 63/39, Dr. Trent started repeating the saline order. His voice had developed an edge that Mara recognized, not the edge of someone processing new information, but the edge of someone who was starting to feel the possibility of being wrong and didn't know what to do with it. At 61/38, the tall escort stepped fully into the bay. "Doctor, what is your current assessment?" "The patient is hemodynamically compromised and we are stabilizing for imaging." "That's not what I asked." Trent turned. "Sir, this is a medical facility and my commander's pressure has dropped 12 points in 4 minutes, the escort said. He had the voice of someone accustomed to being the last word in a room. "I was told this facility had emergency trauma capability. I need to hear an actual plan." Commander Farrow's monitor alarmed. 58/35. Dr. Trent looked at the screen, and in the half-second pause that followed, that specific pause that happens when a decision-maker realizes they are running out of options, Mara moved. She was at the supply cart before Trent turned back around. She had the ultrasound probe in one hand and was pulling the pericardiocentesis kit from the second shelf before anyone in the room processed what she was reaching for. She moved to the left side of the bed, positioned the probe against Farrow's chest, and the image that came up on the portable screen confirmed everything she had said 4 minutes ago. Fluid, around the heart, classic tamponade presentation. The pericardial sac was swollen with blood that had nowhere to go. She spoke clearly, without heat, without looking at Trent. "This is the image. You can see the effusion from here. If you want to do the procedure, I'll assist. If you want me to do it, I need you to step back and I need someone to hold this probe steady." The transport medic was beside her in 2 seconds, holding the probe without being asked. Trent stood at the foot of the bed. 3 seconds passed. 4. Dr. Gareth Holloway, the older physician, the one who used paper clipboards and rarely spoke during emergencies, appeared in the doorway of the bay. He looked at the ultrasound screen. He looked at Mara. He said, "Do it." Trent said, "Holloway." "Marcus." Holloway's voice was quiet. "Look at the screen and look at your patient and make a decision in the next 10 seconds, or she already has." Trent looked at the monitor. 54/30. He stepped back. Mara worked. The procedure was not clean. Nothing is clean when the patient's blood pressure is in the 50s and the room is crowded with people who are either watching in controlled panic or trying not to watch at all. She found the angle by feel as much as by the ultrasound image, talking through what she was doing in the flat, factual voice of someone who has narrated procedures for other people before, not to perform, but because having something to track helps the people around you. Stay functional when their own training is telling them to do something and there's nothing for them to do. The needle went in. The fluid came back. The monitor started climbing before she had the line secured. 62/38. 69 over 41, 75 over 48. She could feel the shift in the room without looking up from her hands. The specific quality of held breath releasing. The transport medic beside her let out a long, slow exhale through his nose, a sound that was almost too controlled to be involuntary. Commander Dex Farrow's chest started moving correctly. Mara secured the line, stepped back, stripped her gloves, and turned to Dr. Trent. He needs surgical repair of the pericardium and evaluation of that shrapnel before anything else shifts. Or two is prepped. He's stable enough to move for the next 20 minutes, maybe 30. I'd use them. Trent was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not gratitude, not anger. Something more uncomfortable than either. Get him to OR2, he said. To the room, not to Mara. But he hadn't told her to step back. The gurney moved. The transport medic squeezed past her toward the door, and as he did, he glanced at her sideways. Not the look of someone assessing a colleague, but the look of someone recalibrating an entire set of assumptions. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The tall escort was the last of the 6 to leave the bay. He stopped at the door and looked back at Mara with the specific stillness of someone who files information for later use. "What's your name?" he said. She answered with what was on her badge. "Voss? Mara Voss." He held her gaze for a moment. "Thank you, Nurse Voss." Then he was gone. The bay was suddenly very quiet. Just Mara, Dr. Holloway, and the residue of what had just happened hanging in the air between them like smoke after a controlled burn. Holloway picked up the clipboard she had set down during the procedure. He looked at it for a moment, then set it back on the cart. "How did you know?" he asked. The presentation was consistent. She was cleaning the cart. Elevated JVP, muffled sounds, hypotension, Beck's triad. It's not subtle if you know what you're looking at. Marcus didn't see it. Marcus was looking at the visible wound. She kept moving. Sometimes the thing that's trying to kill the patient isn't the thing you can see. Holloway was quiet for a moment. "Where did you learn pericardiocentesis?" She looked at him. "Critical care training." He let that sit there between them for a moment, and she could see him deciding not to push it. Holloway was that kind of physician, old enough and experienced enough to know when a door was closed, and when it was worth knocking on anyway. Tonight, he chose not to knock. "Good work," he said, and left. Mara stood in the empty bay for 60 seconds. Then she picked up the discarded gloves and equipment and began restocking the cart, because someone had to do it, and it needed to be done before the next emergency. And doing it herself was faster than waiting for someone else to notice it needed doing. She was almost finished when Donna appeared in the doorway. "Trent wants to talk to you." "I'm sure he does." "His office. Now." Mara set down the last package of gauze and rolled her sleeves down. She wasn't afraid of the conversation. She wasn't even particularly bothered by it. She had navigated versions of this conversation before. Not here, not with Trent, but in other rooms with other men who had been wrong in front of an audience and needed somewhere to put that. She knew how it went. What she did not know, what she could not have predicted, was what was waiting on the other side of the night. Because Commander Dex Farrow was out of surgery in just under 2 hours, and when he was stable enough to speak, the first thing he told the 6 men around his bed was a name. Not Voss. A different name. A name that nobody in this hospital had on any file in any system, attached to any badge. And 2 of those 6 men had been in enough places to know exactly what it meant. Outside the window of Trent's office, where Mara was absorbing a quiet, controlled lecture about scope of practice and professional hierarchy, and the functioning of chain of command in a medical setting, the tall escort was on a secure channel, speaking in low tones to someone she had not seen in 2 years, telling them where she was, telling them she was still exactly who she used to be, and that someone who needed her, someone important, someone whose survival was now entangled with information that multiple parties would spend significant resources to contain, had just said her real name out loud for the first time since she disappeared. Mara nodded at appropriate intervals through Trent's speech. She said, "Understood," twice. She kept her face neutral and her hands still and her eyes on the middle distance. The way she had learned to do in rooms where the person in front of her had authority, she didn't feel like challenging that night. She did not know that by morning, her carefully constructed quiet life had already begun to come apart at the seams. She did not know that the man in recovery had recognized her, not just from the procedure, not just from her hands or her voice, but from a photograph that had circulated in a very specific and very classified operational briefing 3 years ago. She did not know that the name he had said, quietly, in a room she hadn't been in, to 6 people she mostly didn't know, was going to bring a woman she had not spoken to in 2 years directly to the front doors of Harlow Peak Military Medical Center, with files, with clearance, with the specific, exhausted expression of someone who had been looking for a particular person for a very long time and had finally gotten a verifiable location. Mara walked out of Trent's office at 1:52 a.m. The corridor was quiet. The overnight staff moved at the reduced pace of the post-midnight hours. She stopped at the water fountain, drank, straightened up, and caught her reflection in the darkened window of the physician's lounge. She looked at it for a moment. The blonde braid, the blue scrubs, the hospital badge with a name that was hers but wasn't all of her. She had been very careful for 2 years. She had been very thorough. And somewhere in the recovery wing, a man she had not seen since a classified operation in a country she was not supposed to have been in had just told 6 people exactly who she was. She turned away from her reflection and walked back toward the nurse's station, because there were still 4 hours left in her shift, and the work didn't stop because her history had just walked through the emergency bay doors. But the set of her jaw had changed, and the way she moved through the corridor, that careful, space-saving efficiency, had shifted into something older, something that didn't apologize for taking up room. At 2:17 a.m., a black SUV with federal plates pulled into the hospital parking structure, and the woman who stepped out of the passenger side was carrying a briefcase and a security badge and the weight of a file that she had been sitting on for 26 months. Her name was Colonel Adrienne Solis, and she had not driven 4 hours in the middle of the night to apologize. She had driven 4 hours in the middle of the night because the asset she had spent 2 years trying to locate had just saved the life of a SEAL commander carrying intelligence that 3 separate agencies needed. And the people who wanted that intelligence buried had already been notified of his survival, which meant the window was closing. And the woman they called Valkyrie was standing in a hospital that didn't know it was already a target, working a night shift under a name that had almost been enough to keep her hidden. Colonel Solis pushed through the hospital's main entrance doors and walked toward the front desk with the particular stride of someone who has never once in their professional life asked for permission to be somewhere. In the recovery wing, Commander Farrow's monitors beeped at steady, even intervals. In the nurse's station, Mara Voss was charting the last of the night's patient updates, her handwriting precise and unhurried, her face giving nothing away to the overnight staff around her. And in the parking structure, 2 men in a vehicle with civilian plates that didn't quite match the registration sat watching the hospital entrance and waiting for a call that would tell them whether the operation was still viable. They had been sent to find one man. They had not been told there might be someone else in that building worth worrying about. That was going to be their mistake. Colonel Adrienne Solis had a way of walking into a room that made people instinctively look for the exit. Not because she was loud, not because she broadcast authority through volume or aggression. It was something quieter and more unsettling than that. The specific stillness of someone who had already decided how the next 30 minutes were going to go and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. She was 53, compact, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of posture that came from 2 decades of being the most senior woman in rooms that hadn't expected her. She carried the briefcase in her left hand. Her right hand was free. She reached the front desk at 2:19 a.m. and placed her identification on the counter without being asked. The overnight receptionist, a young man, barely 20, who had been awake since 6 the previous morning, looked at the badge, looked at the uniform, and picked up his phone. "I need to speak with whoever is running the night shift," Solis said, "and I need Commander Farrow's current status. I'll need to call the charge nurse. Please do that now." Donna Falk appeared from the corridor 40 seconds later. She took one look at the identification and her face did something complicated. "Colonel, we weren't notified of a base visit." "No, you weren't." Solis picked up her badge and pocketed it. "Commander Farrow? Where is he?" "Recovery, post-surgical. He came through about 40 minutes ago. Dr. Holloway is the attending on, and the nurse who performed the pericardiocentesis. Voss, where is she?" Donna went very still. "She's at the nurse's station. She's still on shift." "Don't move her." Solis looked down the corridor the way someone looks at a map when they already know the route. And I need you to restrict access to Commander Farrow's recovery room to essential medical staff only. No visitors, no transfers, no one in or out without my clearance. Effective immediately. I don't have the authority to... I do. Solis set a single document on the desk. That's a federal medical security order. It takes effect when you read it, not when someone above you confirms it. So, she looked at Donna directly. Have you read it? Donna looked at the document. Yes. Good. Recovery room access is now restricted. Thank you. She walked toward the nurse's station with the briefcase and did not look back to confirm that Donna was complying. She already knew she would. Mara was finishing a chart entry when she heard the footsteps, not the soft-soled shuffle of hospital overnight staff, not the measured pace of a doctor doing rounds. A heel strike. Deliberate. Economical. She looked up before she consciously decided to look up, and the woman coming down the corridor toward her was wearing a uniform she recognized and a rank she had not seen up close in 2 years. She set down the stylus. She did not stand. Colonel Solis stopped at the edge of the nurse's station counter. She looked at Mara for a moment with the expression of someone confirming a long-held suspicion, then set the briefcase on the counter between them. You look like you haven't slept properly in 18 months, she said. 26, Mara said. Right. Solis glanced around the station. The other nurse on duty had moved discreetly to the far end of the corridor. Whether by instinct or Donna's hand signal, Mara couldn't tell. They were effectively alone. We should talk somewhere that isn't the middle of a hallway. I have 4 hours left on my shift. I'm aware of your schedule. Solis pulled a chair from behind the counter and sat in it without being offered, settling the briefcase on her knees. I can wait until 6 if that's what you want. But I'd like you to know what I'm carrying before you decide how much time you want to spend pretending this is a normal conversation. Mara looked at the briefcase. What's in it? Your file. Or rather, the file that was generated after you disappeared, and the file that explains why you disappeared. She paused. And a third file that you've never seen, which is the one I came here to show you. Mara was quiet for a moment. Outside of the window at the end of the corridor, the parking structure lights were burning in the pre-dawn dark. She thought about the 2 men she had noticed through the glass when she walked past 20 minutes ago. The civilian vehicle, engine idling, parked in a spot with direct sightlines to the main entrance. She had filed the detail away without examining why. Now she examined why. Farrow told you I was here, she said. Farrow told my adjutant. My adjutant called me at 11:40. I was in the car by midnight. Solis looked at her steadily. He said you pulled him back from the edge of a cardiac arrest with equipment and a set of hands that most senior surgeons wouldn't have attempted in those conditions. And then he told me something else. Mara waited. He said you looked scared when he said your call sign. Not scared the way someone is scared of being found. Scared the way someone is scared of being needed again. Solis leaned forward slightly. He's known you a long time. He knows the difference. Mara said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Solis set the briefcase on the counter and opened it. The first file was thin, 8 pages, stamped with a classification level that made Mara's chest tighten on reflex. The second was thicker. The third was a manila envelope sealed with a level she had not seen since the last operational briefing she had attended before everything went wrong. The cavern extraction, Solis said. Mara's hands, resting on the counter, did not move. I'm not here to relitigate it, Solis continued. I'm here because the investigation that was closed 18 months ago has been reopened, and the findings are different this time. She tapped the sealed envelope. The intelligence failure that preceded the cavern operation was not random. It was introduced deliberately by a source inside the liaison network. 3 analysts have now confirmed it. The bad coordinates, the civilian presence that wasn't in the brief, the communication blackout in the final 40 minutes. None of it was operational error. She paused. None of it was yours. The corridor was very quiet. Mara looked at the envelope. Who signed off on the original investigation? That's a longer conversation. That's a yes or no question. Solis looked at her for a moment. Deputy Director Harl Weston, who retired 8 months ago and is currently under separate federal investigation for procurement fraud. She let that sit for a second. The cavern file was one of 6 that were closed under his authority in a 14-month window. All 6 have been reopened. Mara stood up. She didn't go anywhere. She just stood, because sitting suddenly felt wrong. and she walked 3 steps to the window and looked out at the parking structure with her arms crossed and her back to Solis, and she stood there for long enough that a less patient person would have said something. Solis was not a less patient person. When Mara turned back around, her face was controlled, but her voice, when she spoke, had a thread of something in it that the last 2 years had almost trained out of her. 4 people died because of those coordinates. Yes. I spent 18 months believing it was on me. I know. And someone made sure I would believe that. Yes. Solis's voice was flat and direct. She wasn't softening it, wasn't over-explaining. She was just saying the thing. Someone made sure you would believe it and made sure you'd disappear. Because you were the one person in that operation who could have identified the communication irregularity if you'd been asked the right questions. And nobody asked you the right questions because the investigation was designed to close, not to find. Mara looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the sealed envelope. What's in that one? Current threat assessment. Solis's voice shifted. Not softer, but more precise. Commander Farrow's extraction 4 hours ago was not a routine operation. What he was extracting, and what is currently in a secure drive that his team brought out with him, is directly connected to the original Kavrin network. The same people, the same pipeline. 2.5 years later, and they are still operating, and Farrow's team just pulled the thread that could unravel the whole structure. She looked at Mara steadily. Which means Farrow is a target, and which means this hospital, tonight, is the location of the most critical piece of evidence in an ongoing federal investigation. Mara looked toward the window again. The idling car in the parking structure. Engine still running at 2:30 a.m. There's a vehicle in the east structure, she said. Civilian plates. Engine's been running since before you arrived. Solis went still. I noticed it on my break. Mara's voice was level. I thought it was base personnel running late, but the plates don't match the base sticker pattern and the driver hasn't moved. Solis had her phone out before Mara finished the sentence. She sent a text in 3 seconds and pocketed it. How many? From the window angle, I could confirm 2, possibly a third in the rear seat. Armed? I couldn't see, but the way they're parked gives them direct coverage of both the main entrance and the emergency bay. Mara looked at her. When did Farrow's survival get reported up the chain? His team checked in at 12:10. So anyone monitoring that channel has had 2 hours and 20 minutes to mobilize. Solis stood. She was already moving toward the corridor, phone in her ear, and her voice dropped to the clipped frequency of someone coordinating rather than conversing. Mara caught fragments, E-structure, possible hostile surveillance, pull the base security detail. And then Solis was 30 feet down the corridor and the conversation was out of earshot. Mara stood at the nurse's station and looked at the 3 files still open on the counter. She looked at them for 4 seconds. Then she closed them, stacked them neatly, and walked down the corridor toward the recovery wing. Not because she had been asked to, because Farrow was at the end of that corridor and someone in a car outside had been watching the building for 2 hours. And the 6 escorts who had come in with him had presumably been directed to some kind of staging area or briefing room, which meant the recovery room itself had fewer bodies in it than it should. She pushed through the recovery wing door and immediately registered the layout. 4 bays, 2 occupied, 1 nurse at the central station who looked up with the expression of someone about to say visiting hours are restricted. Mara held up her badge without breaking stride. I'm on the trauma team that admitted Farrow, just doing a check on his post-surgical status. The recovery nurse, a woman in her 40s, experienced enough to look skeptical, but tired enough not to fight it, watched her walk to the far bay. Commander Dex Farrow was awake. He was gray and clearly in pain, and had the shallow, careful breathing of someone whose chest had been opened and closed within the last 2 hours. But his eyes were tracking when she came around the curtain. He looked at her face. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "You stayed." "I'm still on shift." She checked his monitor without being asked. Pressure was better. 91/60. Still low, but sustainable. "How's your breathing? Hurts?" "That'll be the pericardium repair. It should ease in 48 hours if you don't do anything stupid." She was looking at his line placement, his dressing, the way his color had improved marginally from the gray of 2 hours ago. "You know Solis is here." "Figured." He shifted, winced. "She find you fast. You made it easy." He looked at her. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here. When I said it in the bay, I wasn't thinking straight. I just needed... He stopped. I needed someone I trusted. I know. She kept her voice even. Listen to me. There may be a security situation developing outside the building. Is there anything on your person or in this room that is part of the material your team extracted? Pharaoh's eyes sharpened. No, it's secure. My team has it in a separate location. Do your 6 escorts know that? A pause. Yes. Does anyone who was monitoring your check-in transmission know that? Another pause. Longer this time. No. The drive location was communicated on a separate channel. So anyone coming for the material might come here first, thinking it's still with you. Pharaoh looked at the ceiling for a moment. Yeah, he said. That's a reasonable assumption for them to make. Okay. She straightened. Stay in this bed. Don't call anyone on an open line. If anyone other than your 6 escorts or Colonel Solis or me comes through that curtain, you hit the nurse call button and you keep hitting it. He looked at her with the expression of a man who was accustomed to being the one giving those instructions. Voss? Pharaoh. Her voice was quiet, but not gentle. You have a repaired pericardium and a blood pressure of 91/60. You're not doing anything tonight except breathing and letting your chest wall heal. Let other people handle the rest. He held her gaze for a second. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, too much pain for a smile, but something in the direction of one. Yeah, okay. She left the bay and walked back toward the recovery wing entrance, and she was 3 steps from the door when it opened and Marcus Trent walked through it. He was in street clothes, dark jacket, no tie, which meant someone had called him in rather than him being on duty. He stopped when he saw her, and the expression on his face did the complicated thing it had been doing since the trauma bay, the thing that hadn't resolved into any one feeling yet. Voss? He looked past her toward the bay. How is he? Stable. Pressure's coming up. The repair looks good. Trent nodded slowly. He looked like he hadn't slept, which was accurate since she doubted he'd made it home before being called back. He looked like someone who had been sitting with something unpleasant for several hours and had not yet figured out what to do with it. The pericardiocentesis, he said. Yes. Where did you... Critical care training. Same answer she had given Holloway. Same closed door. But Trent was not Holloway. He didn't have Holloway's patience or his willingness to let closed doors stay closed. He took a step forward. That's not a procedure that comes out of standard critical care training. The angle you used, the way you managed the effusion under pressure conditions. That's not something you learn in a certification course. He stopped. I've done that procedure 6 times in my career, twice in field conditions. He looked at her. You've done it more than twice. She said nothing. The escort, Trent continued, his voice lower now. The tall one. The way he looked at you when he left. That wasn't the way a military escort looks at a civilian nurse. He stopped again. Who are you? Down the corridor, a door opened. The sound of footsteps. Multiple sets, moving fast. Not running, but with the specific urgency of people who have received information and are acting on it immediately. 2 of Pharaoh's escorts came through the recovery wing door, followed by a base security officer Mara didn't recognize. Behind them, Colonel Solis. Solis looked at Trent. Dr. Trent, I need you to return to the main medical wing. This is my facility. With respect, Doctor, this wing is currently under federal security protocol, and I need non-essential personnel clear. She held the door open. Trent looked at Mara one more time, long enough that she could see the thing in his face starting to solidify into something specific. Then he walked through the door. Solis let it close behind him and turned to Mara. The vehicle in the E structure is gone. Gone how? Pulled out approximately 6 minutes after I made the call. Base security has a partial plate and is running it now. Solis's jaw was tight. They may have had a scanner on the base communication channel. If they heard the security pull request, they knew we'd made them. Or they already have what they need and they're repositioning, Mara said. Solis looked at her. If the point was reconnaissance, confirming Pharaoh is here, confirming the building layout, counting the staff, then they already have it. The vehicle pulling out isn't retreat, it's the end of Phase 1. Mara looked at the recovery wing entrance. Do your 6 escorts know to expect a second approach? They're being briefed now. Solis watched her. You're already working this. I'm standing in a building with a recovering patient who carries intelligence that people are willing to mobilize for at 2:30 in the morning. Mara looked at her directly. What did you expect? Solis didn't answer that. Instead, she said, My security team is 10 minutes out. We're going to harden this location until we can arrange a secure transfer. 10 minutes is a long time. I know. And a transfer through the main entrance or the ambulance bay is visible from 3 different approach angles. I know that too. Solis looked at her with something that was not quite an ask, but was adjacent to one. Do you know this building? Mara looked at the ceiling, then at the corridor map mounted beside the recovery station. I've been working here for 2 years. Then I'd like your read on secondary egress if it comes to that. If it comes to that, Mara said, we don't move Pharaoh. He's 45 minutes out of chest surgery and his pressure is still borderline. Moving him under duress could restart the bleed. She paused. We make the building defensible and we wait for your team. Solis looked at her for a moment. Then she did something Mara had not seen her do yet tonight. She exhaled, not dramatically. Just the small physical concession of someone who has been carrying full operational tension for 3 hours and has just found another person to carry part of it. Okay, she said. Okay, Mara said. She turned to the 2 escorts. I need to know what your defensive coverage looks like right now. Who's positioned where, and who has eyes on which entry points. The taller of the 2, not the lead escort from earlier, this one was younger, with a burn scar along his left jaw, looked at Solis. Solis gave a single short nod. He turned back to Mara and started talking. She listened the way she used to listen in operational briefings, tracking the gaps as much as the coverage, building the picture in her head with the specific kind of attention that doesn't announce itself, but doesn't miss anything either. The north corridor was clear. The surgical wing connection was monitored but not staffed. The loading dock on the east side had a camera, but the camera had a 40-degree blind spot that she already knew about from the twice-monthly supply deliveries she had helped coordinate. The loading dock blind spot is the problem, she said when he finished. If they know the building, that's the approach. We can pull someone to cover it. Pulling someone means pulling them from somewhere else. She thought for a second. Is there anyone in your team who can hold a static position without being obvious? Someone who can look like maintenance staff? The escort with the scar looked at the other one. Some kind of silent exchange passed between them. Then he looked back at Mara. Maybe. Because there's a supply delivery scheduled at 6 a.m. loading dock. If someone approaches before that and they're dressed for it, a staff member in the area reads as normal. She paused. But if you pull the wrong person from the wrong coverage point, you open something else. Solis was watching her with the expression she had worn at the nurse's station, the one that was not quite satisfaction because the situation didn't warrant satisfaction, but something in that direction. Make the call, Solis said to the escort. He nodded and stepped aside, phone already out. Mara turned to the recovery nurse, who had been standing at her station with the wide-eyed stillness of someone trying very hard to be professionally unobtrusive during a situation that was well outside the scope of her job description. Is there a staff break room on this wing? End of the corridor, left. Go there and stay there until I come get you. Don't use the public communication system. The nurse looked at Solis. Solis nodded. The nurse went. Mara stood in the suddenly quiet recovery wing and listened to the building around her. Hospitals at 3 in the morning have a specific acoustic texture. The persistent background hum of HVAC, the intermittent soft alarm from somewhere 2 floors up, the distant sound of a door swinging on its return spring. She had been listening to this building for 2 years. She knew the sounds it made when it was normal. She heard something that was not normal. It was small. It was below the threshold that most people would have registered as significant. A sound from the direction of the surgical wing connection, not the door, but the wall-mounted HVAC panel beside the door, which covered a maintenance access corridor that ran behind the east wing. She looked at the wall panel, looked at the 2 escorts, both of them currently on separate communications with their backs to the corridor, looked at Solis, who was reading something on her phone. Mara walked quietly to the supply cabinet beside the recovery station. She opened it and looked at the contents with the eye of someone rapidly inventorying what was useful and what wasn't. IV pole, locking wheel brake, 2 sealed fluid bags, a blood pressure cuff, a crash cart partially visible around the corner with a defibrillator in the charging dock. The HVAC panel shifted. Not much, a half centimeter. The kind of movement that happens when someone on the other side is working the latch mechanism and hasn't quite cleared it yet. Mara picked up the IV pole with her right hand, stepped to the side of the panel, and waited. The latch gave. The panel swung out. The man who came through it was dressed in base maintenance coveralls and was carrying something in his right hand that was not a maintenance tool, and he had approximately 1 second to register that the corridor was not empty before Mara moved. She did not hesitate. She did not announce herself. She did not do any of the things that someone who had spent 2 years being careful and small and below the radar would have done. She moved the way she had been trained to move, the way 2 years of deliberate stillness had not erased, and the IV pole was a tool she had picked not for its weight, but for its reach. And she used that reach with a precision that came from understanding exactly how much force was needed and where to put it, and the man in the maintenance coveralls went down hard, and the thing in his right hand skidded across the linoleum and fetched up against the base of the recovery station. It was not a maintenance tool. Both escorts were across the corridor in under 3 seconds, and the sounds that followed, the rapid, controlled exchange of a team securing a threat, were familiar in the way that things you spent years learning and then spent years trying to forget are always familiar. Solace was there. Her eyes moved from the man on the floor to the open access panel to Mara, standing with the IV pole still in her right hand, breathing through her nose, her face doing nothing at all. The lead escort crouched over the man, securing him with a speed that confirmed he'd done it before. "There'll be more," he said. "I know," Mara said. She set the IV pole against the wall. She looked at the access panel, at the dark maintenance corridor beyond it, and at the specific quality of silence coming from that direction, which was not the silence of an empty space, but the silence of a space where something was waiting to decide what to do next. She looked at Solace. "Tell me your team is closer than 10 minutes, she said. Solace was already on the phone. Her voice was clipped and urgent, and even across the room Mara could hear what she said clearly enough to understand that the answer to that question was not what either of them needed it to be. 7 minutes. 7 minutes, and the maintenance corridor behind that panel was not empty, and the man on the floor was not the only one who had been sent here tonight. And Commander Dexfero was 45 minutes post-surgery in a bay 12 feet away with a blood pressure that had no margin left in it. Mara looked at the access panel, looked at the 2 escorts, looked at the IV pole she had just set against the wall. She picked it up again. The maintenance corridor behind the panel was 8 feet wide and smelled like coolant and old insulation, and it ran the full length of the east wing in both directions. Mara knew this because 3 months into her tenure at Harlow Peak, a burst pipe had flooded the corridor and the facilities manager had asked for nursing staff to help document affected equipment. She had walked the entire length with a clipboard and a flashlight, and the specific attention of someone who, even then, even 2 years into deliberately not being who she used to be, still mapped exits on instinct. She knew where it opened. She also knew that the man currently zip-tied on the linoleum behind her had not come through that panel alone. "Second entry point," she said to the escort with the scar. His name was Riordan, she had caught it during the briefing, "is 200 feet north. There's a T-junction at the HVAC hub. From there you can access the loading dock, the surgical wing, or double back to this corridor." Riordan looked at her. "You know the maintenance layout? Flood damage assessment, 18 months ago." She looked at the open panel. "If they split the approach, one through here to draw attention, one through the north junction to come at the recovery bay from the surgical wing side, then we just secured one direction and opened the other." The second escort, whose name she still didn't have, was already moving toward the corridor map. Solace finished her call and crossed the recovery wing in 6 steps. Her face was doing something tight and controlled that Mara had seen on operational commanders before. Not panic, but the compression of too many variables into a space designed for fewer. "My team is repositioning," Solace said. "They're rerouting through the base south gate. ETA is now 9 minutes, not 7. "That's the wrong direction," Mara said. "I know. North gate is 3 minutes closer to this wing. North gate is closed for maintenance until 0600. Mara filed that and moved on. "The surgical wing connection. Is there a lockable door between the corridor junction and this recovery bay?" "Fire door," Riordan said. "Manual lock. It's usually propped because the surgical staff use it for interwing transfers." "Unprop it and lock it." She looked at him. "Now. And stay on this side." He went. Mara turned to the unnamed escort. "What's your coverage on the north end of this wing?" "Garrett is at the main recovery entrance. One person. Yes. Move him inside the wing and have him hold the interior junction. If anyone comes through the surgical fire door after Reardon locks it, they either break the door or they come back around through the main entrance, and Garrett sees them either way. She paused. But don't leave the main entrance completely uncovered. The escort looked at Solis. Solis said, "Do it." He stepped away. Solis looked at Mara with the expression she had been wearing since the nurse's station, the one that was assessment and confirmation mixed together. You're deploying a two-person team across a multi-point entry building with a critical patient in the middle. I'm buying 9 minutes. Mara looked at the man on the floor. He was conscious. She had been careful about that. And he had said nothing since going down. Young, late 20s, the kind of build and the kind of stillness that said trained, not amateur. "Who sent you?" she asked him. He said nothing. She crouched. She was not going to threaten him, and she was not going to perform the kind of intimidation that looked like something out of a film because that wasn't how it worked, and she had never had the patience for theater. Instead, she looked at his hands, the way they were positioned, the specific tension in his forearms, even zip-tied on a hospital floor. And she looked at his face and said, "You went through a maintenance panel with a suppressed sidearm into a federal medical security zone. You're not getting a lighter outcome by staying quiet. You're just making the next hour more uncomfortable for yourself." He looked at the ceiling. "Okay," she said, and stood up. Solis was watching. "He won't talk." "He doesn't need to." She looked at the sidearm still on the floor where Reardon had kicked it clear. "That's a specific model. Suppressor is custom fitted, not aftermarket. Someone outfitted that weapon for him, not in a gun shop." She looked at Solis. "This isn't improvised. Someone had this operation ready to move the moment Pharaoh's survival was confirmed." "I know." "Which means they had a contingency for this facility specifically. They knew the layout, the maintenance access, the camera blind spot, the shift schedule." She was thinking as she spoke, not performing. "Someone with building access gave them this." Solis went very still. "When did you place the security order on this wing?" 2:19 a.m. "Who received a copy?" Solis's jaw tightened. "The charge nurse, the facility administrator on call, the base security duty officer." A pause. "And the medical director?" Mara looked at her. "Marcus Trent," Solis said, very quietly. "Who was already here," Mara said, "in street clothes, at 2:30 in the morning, called in." "Who called him?" "I don't know. Donna didn't mention it." Mara kept her voice flat. Not accusation, she didn't have enough for accusation, but the shape of it was sitting there between them like something neither of them wanted to pick up before they had to. "It might be nothing." "It might be. But I'd know where he is right now." Solis had her phone out again. She sent a text, waited 4 seconds, sent another. Then she looked up. "He's in the physician's lounge. He told the night admin he was waiting for an update on his patient." "Which patient?" "Pharaoh." The fire door at the end of the corridor made a sound. Not the sound of it opening, but the sound of something testing it. A pressure check. Someone on the other side who had found it locked and was deciding what that meant. Mara moved to the recovery bay curtain. "Pharaoh." He opened his eyes. He had not been asleep. She doubted he'd been close to sleep. "There's a possibility we're going to have company in the next few minutes," she said, keeping her voice level. "I need you to tell me right now. The drive your team extracted. Is there anyone in this building who knows where it actually is?" Pharaoh looked at her. "Tanner knows. He's my lead escort." "The tall one?" "Yeah." "Where's Tanner right now?" "Last I heard, the staging room they put us in off the main corridor. Room—" He stopped, his face going tight with the effort of movement as he tried to shift. "Room 114, or somewhere near there." "Does Tanner have a secure line?" "Always." "Okay." She looked at him steadily. "You stay completely still. If that monitor alarms, I need you to let it alarm. Don't try to silence it yourself. Don't try to sit up. Let it do its job." She paused. "Can you do that?" "Yeah." He looked at her with the expression of a man who was accustomed to being the one holding the line and was finding this particular version of restraint genuinely difficult. "Voss." "What?" "The cavern operation." He said it quietly. "I tried to find you, after. I filed 3 requests to access your debrief file and all 3 were denied. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. Solis told me. She let the curtain fall. Solis was at the recovery station with Riordan, who had returned from locking the fire door and was reporting something in a low voice. Mara heard locked manual bolt, should hold unless they have tools, and the junction on the north side has a secondary, before she reached them. I need someone to get to room 114 or the adjacent staging area and locate Tanner, she said, without using the main corridor. Riordan looked up. There's no other route from here to the main wing without going through the east access. There's the exterior walkway, ground floor, east face of the building, service access door beside the ambulance bay. It exits onto the covered walkway and reconnects at the main wing south entrance. She looked at him. 2 minutes on foot. He looked at Solis. Go, Solis said. He went. The fire door at the end of the corridor made the sound again. Less tentative this time. Mara looked at the recovery station. She looked at the unnamed escort. She was going to need to start calling him something. Her brain had defaulted to 2, who was positioned near the main recovery entrance with his back to the wall and the professional stillness of someone who had been in worse positions than this. She looked at what was available to her. The supply cabinet she had already cataloged. The crash cart. A medication dispensing unit, locked, bolted to the wall, heavy. 2 IV poles. The recovery station itself with its monitors and its surface clutter and its rolling chair that was worth exactly nothing as a physical tool, but was worth something as a noise-making distraction if needed. And the defibrillator. She was looking at the defibrillator with the calculating eye of someone who had just thought of something that she was not entirely comfortable thinking when the fire door gave. Not a full breach, the bolt held, but the frame moved. Whoever was on the other side had a tool and had decided to use it, which meant they had already committed to a hard entry and were no longer interested in stealth. Solis moved to a position behind the recovery station. 2 moved to the wall beside the main entrance. Mara stayed where she was, in the center of the wing, which was a deliberate choice. The center gave her sight lines in both directions and access to the crash cart, and she was not going to make herself small in her own operating space. The fire door came off its bolt with a sound that was less violent than she had expected. Clean, controlled, which told her they had the right tool and knew how to use it. And 2 men came through it moving fast and low, and they had approximately 2 seconds of tactical advantage before they registered that the wing was not empty, and the person standing in the middle of it was not the medical staff they had expected. 2 seconds was enough. She didn't take both of them. She was not going to pretend that was a realistic outcome, and she had not planned for it. What she had planned for was creating enough disruption in the first 4 seconds that 2 had a viable window to close from the entrance side, and that was what happened. Not cleanly, not without cost, because the second man through the door was faster than she had accounted for and got a grip on her left arm that she had to break out of in a way that sent a flare of pain up her shoulder that she filed away for later. But it worked in the functional sense that within 30 seconds both men were on the floor, and Solis was covering them with a sidearm that had appeared from somewhere under her jacket, and 2 was securing the second one with the practiced speed of someone who had been waiting for a reason to move. Mara stood in the middle of the recovery wing, breathing through her nose, her left shoulder doing something she was going to need to pay attention to, and counted. 4, plus the one in the maintenance corridor. If the vehicle had held 3 people and they had split the approach, the math was possible, but it was not certain. Clear? Solis said. Not confirmed, Mara said. Pharaoh's monitor? 2 asked from the floor, not looking up. She crossed to the bay in 3 steps. Pharaoh was watching the curtain with every muscle in his body tight with the effort of not sitting up, and his monitor was reading. She looked at it. 93/62 and a heart rate of 88, which was elevated but not alarming for someone who had just listened to a physical altercation 6 feet from his bed. You're okay, she told him. I know. His voice was rough. You? Fine. The shoulder was not fine, but it was not the problem right now. She came back out and looked at the 2 men on the floor and then at Solis. Where's Trent? Solis checked her phone, still showing the physician's lounge. I need that confirmed in person, not by self-report. Solis sent another text. In the 60 seconds that followed, the sounds of the building reasserted themselves around the recovery wing. The HVAC hum, the distant floor alarm from upstairs, the specific quality of 3 a.m. quiet that was more absence than peace. Mara's shoulder was telling her things she didn't want to hear. She rotated it carefully, feeling the range, and determined it was soft tissue. Strained, not torn, not dislocated. Usable. Painful, but usable. Solis's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Her face did something. "He's not in the lounge," she said. Mara looked at her. The admin checked. The lounge is empty. His jacket is still there. His phone is still there. Solis looked up. Marcus Trent is not in the building. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds before it was broken by the sound of Commander Farrow's monitor alarming. Not a pressure drop, not a rate change, but the specific alarm pattern of a lead disconnect, which meant someone had touched the leads, which meant someone was in the bay. Mara was through the curtain in under 2 seconds. The bay was empty. Farrow was in the bed, leads intact, monitor settling back to normal. He was looking at the monitor with the expression of a man who had just looked at the wrong thing too fast and startled it. "What happened?" she said. "I moved." He looked sheepish in the way that very large men who are accustomed to moving freely look sheepish when they are reminded they cannot. "I shifted and caught the lead wire." She exhaled through her nose. "Check the connection. Reset the alarm." "I said don't move." "I know, I was—" He stopped. "I was trying to see through the curtain." "Farrow." "I know." He looked up at her. "I know. I'm sorry." She rechecked his pressure, 91/60, back down from the adrenaline spike of 2 minutes ago, but still within range. His color was worse than it had been when she first came in here, which was the sustained stress reading as physical, which was going to be a problem if this didn't resolve in the next few minutes. "Your pressure is dropping again," she said, not accusatory, just factual. "I need you to actively slow your breathing. In through the nose, count 4. Out through the mouth, count 6. Do that until I come back." "Where are you going?" "To find out where Marcus Trent went." She came back into the main recovery space and looked at Solis. "The physician's lounge. Where is it relative to the building?" "Main wing, ground floor, adjacent to the administrative corridor, which connects to the records room and the base communication hub." Solis looked at her. "And the exterior service road on the west side." "Is the service road covered?" "No." Mara looked at the 2 men on the floor, at 2 standing over them, at the open fire door with the dark surgical corridor behind it, and she thought about the shape of what had happened tonight. The vehicle with sight lines to both entrances, the maintenance approach, the fire door, the timing. And she thought about what it meant that a medical director had received a federal security order and then disappeared while 4 people breached his facility, and she thought about the secure drive that Farrow's team had extracted, and the network it was connected to, and the question of who else in this building might have been connected to that network before tonight. She looked at Solis. "The building access records. Who has a key card for the East Maintenance Corridor?" Solis was already on her phone. She was asking the question before Mara finished asking it, which meant she had already been thinking in the same direction. The answer came back in 40 seconds. 12 staff members, Solis said. Facilities, admin, 2 senior physicians. She looked up. "And Trent, he has a master access card from when the building management system was upgraded last year." "Did anyone check whether his card was swiped tonight?" Another 30 seconds. "Yes," Solis said. At 1:47 a.m., East Maintenance Corridor access, 32 minutes before the first man came through the panel. The math was not complicated. The math was, in fact, brutally simple, and Mara stood with it for a moment, turning it over, because she was someone who wanted to be right before she said something out loud rather than right after. She had worked beside Marcus Trent for 2 years. She had absorbed his condescension and his obstructions and his certainty that she was less than what she was, and she had filed it under the category of institutional hierarchy and inflated ego and the specific variety of insecurity that presented as authority. She had not once considered that there was something operational underneath it, but then again she had not been looking. She had been looking away. "He let them in," she said. Solis said nothing. "He has a master access card and he swiped it at 1:47. He knew Farrow was here by midnight. He was called in. He had the building layout and the access credentials and 40 minutes to communicate them before we locked down the wing." She looked at Solis. "He's not just gone. He left ahead of the breach because he knew it was coming. We don't have confirmation. He's not in the building. His personal effects are still there. His phone is still there. She looked at Solis. Who leaves their phone? Solis put her own phone to her ear. She was calling someone more senior than a text message could reach, and her voice when she spoke had the clipped authority of someone escalating through channels with no patience for the process. Mara caught potential insider access, current federal security situation, location trace on Marcus Trent, medical director, Fort Calderon, and then Solis moved out of earshot. Mara turned to two. Lock the fire door from this side. Push the crash cart against it. He moved. She went back to Pharaoh. He was still doing the breathing she had told him to do, which was more disciplined than most people managed when they were scared, and she registered that without commenting on it. She checked his pressure again. 93/63. What's happening? He said. Trent may have facilitated the access tonight. Pharaoh's face did something quiet and controlled. The medical director. Yes. How deep does it go? I don't know yet. She was checking his pericardial line, the temporary drain from the procedure, still clear, no signs of reaccumulation. But Solis is running it. How long until her team gets here? She looked at the clock on the monitor. 3:08 a.m. Less than 4 minutes now. Pharaoh nodded. He was quiet for a moment, then, the drive. The material my team extracted. He met her eyes. It's not just network mapping. It's names. Current operatives, current handlers, current financial conduits. He paused. If Trent is connected, his name is probably on it. She looked at him. Which means he didn't just let them in to grab the drive, Pharaoh said. He let them in because if they don't get the drive, his name comes out. And he's been inside this facility for... He stopped. 11 years, Mara said. How long have you been here? 2 years. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Boss, I need to ask you something. Don't. Mara, whatever you're about to ask, the answer is later. She straightened. Right now, I need you to stay in this bed and keep breathing. She looked at his monitor one more time. Your pressure is holding. That's the most important thing that's happening right now. He held her gaze. Her gaze. Later, she said again. She came back out into the main recovery space and found Solis coming through the main entrance with a look on her face that was not the look of someone who has just received good news. Location trace on Trent's vehicle came back, Solis said. Where is he? He was. He used his personal vehicle. It has a base parking transponder. Last ping was at 3:04 a.m. She paused. East perimeter of the base, the service gate. He's off base. Was off base. Gate log shows the transponder exited at 3:06. Solis's voice was controlled and precise, the way it had been all night. But underneath it now, there was something that was edging toward urgency in a way it hadn't before. But the gate officer flagged it because the vehicle slowed at the checkpoint, then accelerated through without stopping. Mara processed this. He ran the gate. Yes. Which means he knows he's made. Which means he's not running to something, Solis said. He's running because someone told him to run. Right now. Tonight. She looked at Mara directly. Someone who is still inside this building told him to go. The recovery wing was very quiet. Mara looked at the main entrance, at the fire door with the crash cart against it, at the 2 men on the floor, both of them having said nothing since being secured, at the open maintenance panel in the corridor and the third man beyond it, and the access card swipe at 1:47 a.m. that put Trent in that corridor 32 minutes before the breach. She looked at Solis. Who else received a copy of your federal security order? She said. Solis had already gone still. You said the charge nurse, the facility administrator on call, the base security duty officer, and the medical director. Mara kept her voice level. The base security duty officer. What do you know about him? Solis was reaching for her phone. His name, Mara said. Lieutenant Declan Vorst, attached to Harlow Peak Base Security for 14 months. Prior posting? I'd have to pull the file. Pull it now. Mara was already moving toward the main entrance. Because someone told Trent to run at 3:06 a.m. Trent's personal effects are still in the lounge. He didn't decide to run on his own. Someone with current situational awareness told him the window was closing. She looked at Solis over her shoulder. The charge nurse went home at 2. The facility administrator on call is off-site. That leaves the base security duty officer, the same person who should have been coordinating your external security team and who told you the north gate was closed. Solis made the call in the corridor. Mara pushed through the main recovery entrance into the external hallway and found the space empty. Garrett, the escort Riordan had positioned here, had followed his relocation instructions to the interior junction, and the hallway that connected the recovery wing to the main building was unoccupied and quiet. She went 4 steps toward the main wing junction and stopped. There were footsteps coming from the direction of the administrative corridor. Not hurried, measured. Someone who either didn't know she was there or didn't care whether she heard them coming. She pressed against the wall to the right of the junction and waited. The footsteps stopped 8 feet short of the corner. Silence. Then a voice, male, mid-range, carrying the specific flatness of someone who has decided to skip past the part where they pretend, "Nurse Voss, I know you're there. I could hear you in the corridor." She said nothing. "I'm Lieutenant Declan Vorst. I'm base security." A pause. "I'm also the person who's about to tell you that this situation is significantly more complicated than Colonel Solis has had time to explain to you tonight." Another pause. "And I think you should hear it before her team gets here in a beat. 90 seconds. She stayed exactly where she was. "You've been here 2 years, Vorst said. You came to Harlow Peak specifically. You requested this posting." A pause that had weight in it. "Why did you request a posting to a base-adjacent medical facility 14 months after you left active service? Because that's not what someone does when they want to disappear." The hallway was very quiet. "What someone does when they want to disappear," Vorst continued, "is go somewhere no one is looking, and no one should have been looking here, except someone told them where to look." His voice was still flat, but something had shifted in it. 2 years ago, when your posting was approved." Mara stayed against the wall. "Who approved your posting, Nurse Voss?" The footsteps in the corridor outside grew louder. Solis's team, finally arriving, coming through the south entrance with the controlled urgency of people who had been 9 minutes away and were now here. And Declan Vorst, on the other side of the junction, said one more thing in the 3 seconds before the building filled with sound. He said, "Ask Solis who signed your transfer request." The building filled with sound all at once. Boots on hard floor, radio traffic, the specific controlled noise of a security team that had been running behind the situation for 40 minutes and was now here and trying to make up the distance. Mara stayed against the wall for exactly 3 more seconds. Then she stepped around the junction. Declan Vorst was standing 8 feet away, hands visible, no weapon drawn. He was mid-40s, lean, with the posture of prior military service that the security uniform didn't quite cover. He looked at her the way someone looks at a person they've been studying from a distance and are now seen up close for the first time, with the specific quality of someone checking a mental image against the real thing. He did not run. That was the first thing she registered. Someone guilty of what she had just been constructing in her head would have run. He had 90 seconds of warning. He knew the team was arriving, and he was still standing in a corridor with his hands where she could see them. She said, "Don't move." "I'm not moving," he said. Solis came around the South Junction corner 30 seconds later with 2 members of her team flanking her, and she stopped when she saw Vorst. Her face did something complicated and controlled. "Vorst. Colonel." His voice was level. "I'd appreciate the chance to talk before anyone does anything that's hard to walk back." "You can appreciate it from the ground," one of the team members said. "Hold," Solis said. The team member held. Solis looked at Vorst. Then she looked at Mara. Something moved between them. Not a full communication, just the fragment of one. The specific exchange of 2 people who have been operating in parallel and have just arrived at the same unresolved question. "Put him in a room," Solis said to her team. "Don't touch him beyond securing, and get me a line to base command." Vorst went with the team members without resistance. He was not zip-tied. He walked with his hands behind his back in a posture that was closer to voluntary compliance than physical restraint, and he kept his face forward and his mouth closed, and Mara watched him go with the feeling of someone who has picked up a piece of a puzzle and cannot yet tell which side is the picture. Solis turned to her. "What did he say?" Mara told her. Solis listened without interrupting, which was the thing about her that Mara had been cataloging all night. She was a person who could receive unwelcome information without immediately reorganizing it into something more comfortable. She just took it in and held it. When Mara finished, Solis was quiet for 4 seconds. "He asked who signed your transfer request," she said. "Yes. Do you know?" I submitted my application through the standard veteran employment pathway. The approval came back in 6 weeks. I didn't look closely at the signature because I didn't have a reason to. Mara kept her voice even. I have a reason now. Solis looked down the corridor, then back. The transfer request would be in your personnel file, which is in federal records. She paused. Which I can pull, but not from here. How long? 20 minutes if I have someone on it now. She looked at Mara directly. Are you asking me to pull it? Mara looked at her for a moment. She thought about what Vorst had said and the way he had said it. Not as a threat, not as leverage, but with the specific flatness of someone delivering information they believed was necessary. She thought about the vehicle in the parking structure and the maintenance corridor and the fire door and 4 men on the recovery wing floor. And she thought about Marcus Trent's master access card swiped at 1:47 a.m. And she thought about a transfer approval that had come back in 6 weeks to a posting that nobody should have been looking at. Yes, she said. Solis made the call. They walked back to the recovery wing together, and Solis's team was visible now in the corridors. 2 people at the main entrance, 1 at the administrative junction, 1 coming out of the east maintenance access with a flashlight confirming the corridor was clear. The building felt different with them in it. Not safer exactly. The situation had too many open threads for safe, but more defined, like a room where someone has turned on the lights and you can finally see what the furniture is. Mara went to Pharaoh first. He was awake, his pressure holding at 94/64, his color slightly better than 20 minutes ago. He looked at her face when she came through the curtain and read something in it that made him shift, carefully, with the disciplined caution of a man who had been told not to move and had mostly respected that, and settle back against the pillow. How bad? He said. Unknown yet. She was checking his lines, his drainage, the clarity of the pericardial output, still clean. There's a secondary layer we're working through. Trent? Off base. His vehicle ran the east perimeter gate at 3:06. She looked up from the drain. Base command has the plate and the transponder. He won't get far. What's the secondary layer? She decided to tell him, partly because he had a right to the operational picture and partly because Dex Pharaoh had known her for 7 years, even with the 2-year gap, and there was a specific value in saying something out loud to someone who understood the full weight of it. Someone may have placed me here, she said, 2 years ago. The posting approval. Pharaoh was quiet for a moment. Placed you. Vorst, the security officer, asked who signed my transfer request, and the way he asked it wasn't rhetorical. She kept her voice clinical. If my posting here was arranged rather than approved, then whoever arranged it knew I'd come to a military-adjacent facility. They knew my skill set, and they may have been counting on something like tonight happening. Or they were protecting you, Pharaoh said. She looked at him. If someone wanted you somewhere safe, somewhere with base proximity and medical infrastructure, after Cavern fell apart and you were being made to carry it, placing you in a covered posting is one way to do that. He held her eyes. Not everything is an operation against you. No, she said, but I'd like to know which one this was. She reset his monitor alarm and came back out. Solis was at the recovery station with 2 of her team members and a laptop that had appeared from somewhere in the briefcase. She was typing, or someone on the other end of a secure line was typing and reading results back to her, and her face was doing the controlled thing again but with more effort than earlier. Mara waited. She did not pace. She stood beside the recovery station and watched the corridor and listened to the building and let the information that was coming settle into whatever shape it was going to settle into. There was nothing to gain from pre-deciding what it meant. Solis looked up at 3:24 a.m. Your transfer request, she said. It was processed through the Veteran Healthcare Employment Gateway. Standard pathway, standard documentation. And the signature? A pause that lasted 2 seconds longer than it needed to. Deputy Director Harl Weston. The name landed in the room with the particular weight of something that had been in the air for a while and had finally come down. Mara looked at her. The same Weston who closed the Cavern investigation, Solis said. Not a question. And is currently under federal investigation for procurement fraud, Mara said. Yes. The room was quiet for a moment. One of the team members near the door was looking at his shoes with the deliberate neutrality of someone who has just heard something significant and is processing it without being asked to. He's been under investigation for 8 months, Mara said. The Cavern files were reopened. 6 files, all closed under his authority. She was thinking as she spoke, not to Solis specifically, but to the shape of the thing. If Weston was connected to the network, if he was a conduit for the same operation that Pharaoh's team just extracted material from, then closing. Cavern wasn't bureaucratic negligence, it was containment. Yes, Solis said, and placing me here 2 years ago, after the investigation closed. May have been a second containment, Solis said, keeping you close to a military facility where you could be monitored, keeping you in a position that was controlled. She paused. Or it may have been someone on the other side of Weston's network who saw placing you at a base-adjacent facility as a long-term strategic resource. Because if something like tonight happened, you'd be available. Solis's voice was flat. And you'd have 2 years of institutional invisibility that made you useful in exactly the way you've been useful tonight. The distinction between those two possibilities, monitored versus positioned, was not academic. One meant she had been managed as a liability. The other meant she had been managed as an asset. The person who would have made each of those calls was a different person. The intent was structurally opposite, but the outcome was the same. She had been placed here by someone who knew exactly who she was, and for 2 years she had believed her own invisibility was self-constructed. She filed the feeling that produced and addressed it later. Vorst, she said, he knew about the transfer request. That's not public information. No. So either he's connected to Weston's network, or he's been investigating it, Solis said, and following the thread brought him to your posting. Mara looked toward the room where Vorst was being held. I want to talk to him. Mara, not to interrogate him, to listen. She looked at Solis. He had 90 seconds to run before your team arrived. He didn't. He stood in a corridor with his hands visible and waited. She paused. That's not the behavior of someone who facilitated a breach. That's the behavior of someone who has been building toward a specific moment and decided tonight was it. Solis held her gaze for a long moment. He may have been the one who told Trent to run. Or he may have told Trent to run because Trent was a panicking asset who was about to do something worse than run. She kept her voice level. I'm not saying he's clean. I'm saying I want to hear what he has to say before we decide what he is. Another long moment. Then Solis said, 10 minutes. I'm in the room. Agreed. The room they had put Vorst in was a consulting office off the main recovery corridor. Small, fluorescent, with 2 chairs and a desk, and the specific cheerlessness of a space that is used for delivering difficult news and has absorbed some of that quality into its walls. He was sitting in the chair farthest from the door, which was either instinct or a deliberate visual signal that he was not trying to get closer to an exit. He looked up when they came in. His hands were still behind his back. He had not been restrained, but he was holding that posture anyway, and she thought it was probably habit from a long time of presenting himself in situations where his intentions needed to be visible. Solis sat. Mara stood near the door. Your personnel file lists your prior posting as Fort Deegan, Solis said. Intelligence liaison, 14 months before transfer here. That's accurate, Vorst said. What's not in your file? He looked at her for a moment. 4 months at Deegan. I was running a parallel track under DIA oversight, counterintelligence, specifically following financial conduits connected to an operation that ran through the Cavern network. Solis was very still. I got to Weston 8 months before his fraud investigation was opened, Vorst said. The fraud investigation is the public thread. The actual thread goes deeper. Weston was a financial node, check. He approved contracts and redirected funds and closed files. But he wasn't the top of it. He paused. I came to Harlow Peak because one of the financial conduits ran through medical procurement contracts attached to this base. 11 years of them, starting when Marcus Trent was appointed medical director. The office was very quiet. Trent has been skimming procurement contracts and routing the difference through shell contractors who are connected to the same network that ran the Cavern operation, Vorst said. Not because he's an ideological operative, because he needed money and someone offered him a clean way to take it and keep taking it, and after enough years that became its own kind of loyalty. He paused. When Pharaoh's team extracted the drive, and Pharaoh was brought here specifically, Trent panicked, because his name is on that drive. How do you know what's on the drive? Solis said. Because I've spent 14 months building a parallel record of everything that should be on it. Vorst looked at her steadily. I've been waiting for a federal event that would force the main investigation to intersect with the procurement thread. Pharaoh's extraction is that event. Solis was quiet. Mara was watching Vorst's face. He was not performing. He was tired. Genuinely, structurally tired. The kind that came from operating alone on a long timeline without being able to tell the people around him what he was doing. She knew what that looked like from the inside. "The transfer request," she said. "Mine. Weston signed it. Did you know that when you came here?" He looked at her. "I knew it 6 months after I arrived. I pulled transfer records for all staff with military medical backgrounds, looking for anyone else who might have been placed here through Weston's influence." A pause. "Your file stood out. Because?" "Because the Kavrin investigation was in Weston's closure batch, and you were the one person in that operation who could have disrupted the narrative if you'd been asked the right questions." He held her gaze. "You weren't placed here to be monitored. You were placed here because Weston owed someone a favor and that someone told him where to put you, close to a military facility, isolated, in a position where your skills were underutilized and your history was buried." He paused. "Whoever asked Weston to do it wanted you somewhere you couldn't cause trouble." The consulting room was very quiet. "Do you know who asked him?" Mara said. "Not by name. Not yet." Vorst's voice was level. "But it's in the procurement records. It's in the contract chain. That's why I need the drive." Solis looked at Mara. Mara looked at the wall for a moment. She thought about 2 years of blue scrubs and 12-hour shifts and Marcus Trent telling her she was too small for the room she was standing in. She thought about a transfer approval that had come back in 6 weeks and that she had never looked closely at because she had been so relieved to have somewhere to go that she had not asked who opened the door. She thought about the Kavrin operation and 4 people dead and 18 months of carrying something that had been built specifically to stay on her. She looked at Vorst. "Your parallel record, where is it?" "Secure offsite server. I have access credentials." "And you're willing to give those to a federal investigation?" "That's why I'm sitting in this chair with my hands behind my back instead of in my vehicle." He said it without heat. "I've been building toward this for 14 months. Tonight accelerated the timeline, but the destination is the same." Solis's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her face shifted. Not alarm, but the specific change of someone receiving a significant update. "Base Command located Trent's vehicle," she said. "He made it 17 miles before a county unit clocked him on a routine traffic stop. He's in custody." The air in the room changed. Not relief. It was too early for relief. But something moved, the way pressure moves when a valve opens. Mara felt it and did not name it. "When he lawyers up," Vorst said, "he'll offer the network to negotiate his sentence. He doesn't have the top of the chain, but he has 6 years of contractor names and meeting locations and communication records that will accelerate the existing investigation by months." He paused. "Which is also why you need the drive. Because the drive and Trent's disclosure together are a complete picture." Solis stood. "I'm going to need everything you have tonight." "I know. And you're going to need to walk me through your methodology, because DIA involvement that wasn't properly disclosed to Base Command is going to create jurisdictional issues that—" "I know that too." He looked up at her. "I've been writing the jurisdictional brief for 4 months in anticipation of this conversation." Solis looked at him for a long moment, with the expression of someone who is deciding how much frustration to express about the fact that a parallel investigation had been running under her nose in her facility for 14 months, and nobody had told her. She decided on none. "Get up," she said. "We have a lot of work to do." He stood. Mara stepped back from the doorway to let him through. He passed close enough that she could have spoken to him directly, and for a moment she thought he was going to say something. There was the shape of it in his posture. But he didn't. He walked into the corridor and Solis's team met him there, and they moved toward the administrative wing together in a configuration that was not quite arrest and not quite escort, the kind of in-between status that investigations produced when the situation was still being defined. Mara stood in the doorway of the consulting room for a moment. She thought about the person who had told Weston where to put her, the unnamed top of a procurement chain that ran through Trent and beyond, the favor that had been called in to keep a combat medic with inconvenient operational knowledge in a quiet posting under an obstructive supervisor where she wouldn't be looking for anything, the person who had built the cage. Not Weston. Weston was the lock, not the architect. Not Trent. Someone else, further back, further up, whose name was in a procurement chain that Vorst had 14 months of records on, and that a secure drive extracted from a classified location was going to illuminate. She walked back to the recovery wing. Pharaoh was awake. He looked at her face when she came through the curtain and read it the way he had always been able to read her. Not completely, because nobody read her completely, but enough. "Trent's in custody," she said. "And?" "And there's more." She sat in the chair beside his bed, the first time she had sat down since 11:30 p.m. And she told him what Vorst had said. She told it plainly, without editorializing, and he listened the way he had always listened, with the stillness of someone who understood that the person talking needed to get through it without being interrupted. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. His pressure reading on the monitor said 97/66, the best it had been all night. "The person who had Weston place you here," he said, "you think their name is on the drive. Vorst thinks the procurement chain leads there. And Vorst's parallel record corroborates the drive. That's what he's saying." Pharaoh looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then, "Mara, when I said your call sign tonight, in the bay, I wasn't sure it was going to mean anything. I didn't know what 2 years had done to you." He paused. "I'm glad I was wrong." She looked at the monitor because looking at the monitor was something to do with her eyes. "For the record," he said, "you were never wrong about Cavern. Not the operation, not the call you made, not anything." His voice was straightforward, not consoling. Pharaoh didn't do consoling. It wasn't in him, just stating a thing he believed. "I know that doesn't undo 18 months. "No," she said, "it doesn't. But it's still true." She nodded once. Then she stood, because sitting still for too long produced things she didn't currently have room for, and she needed to check his pericardial drain again anyway and confirm his temperature hadn't shifted in the last hour. She was reaching for the drain output when Solis appeared in the bay entrance. Her face was doing something that was not controlled in the way it had been all night. It was controlled in a different way, the kind of control that comes after something unexpected, when you are in the process of deciding how to present it. "The drive," Solis said. Mara looked at her. "Tanner, Pharaoh's lead escort, accessed it 30 minutes ago to confirm the extraction integrity." She paused. "The name at the top of the procurement chain, the person who built the contractor network that Trent and Weston and 6 others were connected to." Pharaoh had gone very still in the bed. "We have an identification," Solis said. She was looking at Mara. "His name is Brigadier General Otto Skarek. He retired from active service 14 months ago." Another pause, and this one had weight in it. "His last active posting was as Oversight Commander for the Joint Medical Facilities Review Board." She paused one more time. "Which means he had direct authority over personnel placement at base-adjacent medical facilities for the last 6 years of his service." The recovery bay was very quiet. "He didn't just connect to the network through procurement," Solis said. "He built the pipeline, and he's been directing it from retirement through cutouts and contractors, and people like Weston and Trent, who were too invested to stop." She met Mara's eyes fully. "And he signed off on your specific posting personally. His name is on the secondary authorization that Weston processed." Mara stood with that. She had thought she was looking at the ceiling of it. She had thought Weston was close to the top, and the top wasn't much further. She had thought, in the way that tired people think when the night has already been longer than most, that the architecture of it was almost visible. But a retired brigadier general with 6 years of direct authority over military medical facility personnel was not the ceiling. That was a different order of thing entirely. "Where is he?" Mara said. "That," Solis said, "is currently the most important question we have." Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Her face went very still. "What?" Mara said. Solis looked up. Skarek's residential address was flagged for a welfare check 40 minutes ago. Neighbor reported lights on at an unusual hour. She paused. When local units arrived, the house was empty, vehicle gone, no indication of when he left. "He knows," Pharaoh said from the bed. His voice was quiet and very certain. "He's been monitoring the situation. He knew the moment the drive was extracted." "He's been mobile for at least 40 minutes, Solis said. "Possibly longer." Mara looked at the recovery bay around her, at the monitors, the drain, the man in the bed who had been 45 minutes from death when he came through the emergency doors. At the corridor outside, now staffed by Solis's team, and Pharaoh's escorts, and a base security apparatus that was 3 hours behind a situation that had been moving faster than it. She looked at Solis. The drive. Is it physically secure right now? Tanner has it. Where's Tanner? A pause. A pause that was 2 seconds too long. He was in the staging room, Solis said. She was already raising her phone. I'll confirm. The call connected. She waited. Her face changed in the way that faces change when a line rings and does not pick up. She lowered the phone. She looked at Mara. And in the space between the question she had not asked and the answer that was already forming in both of their minds, the building's emergency lighting system activated. Not a power failure, not a fire alarm, but the specific pattern that the base security system used when someone had triggered the exterior perimeter sensors on the west side of the building. The service road. The one that ran behind the administrative wing. The one that Marcus Trent's vehicle had access to. The one that a retired brigadier general who had been monitoring a federal extraction operation from the moment it was confirmed would know about, because for 6 years he had had authority over every facility that used it. Mara was already moving. She moved the way she had moved in the recovery wing 40 minutes ago. Not running, because running in a building produces noise that tells people where you are, but fast and quiet and with the specific economy of someone who has already mapped the route. The service road access was on the west face of the building. The administrative wing was between her and it, connected by the corridor that ran past the physician's lounge, past the consulting room where Vorst had been sitting with his hands behind his back, past the records room and the base communication hub. It was 60 feet of straight corridor and then a left turn, and then the exterior access door that opened onto the covered walkway above the service road. She knew this because she had walked it twice a week for 2 years to collect the facility's paperwork that nobody else bothered to retrieve in person. Solis was one step behind her. She heard her on the radio, clipped, controlled, repositioning her team, and heard the response frequencies of people moving inside the building to converge on the west side. She did not slow down for the convergence. Convergence took time, and she did not know how much time Tanner had. She pushed through the administrative corridor door and went left without breaking stride. The physician's lounge door was open. She registered it peripherally, open when it had been closed 20 minutes ago, Trent's jacket still visible on the chair inside, and kept moving because the lounge was not where the problem was. The exterior access door at the end of the corridor was also open, not wide. Propped, the way it was propped during supply deliveries, with the rubber door stopper that the facility's staff kept clipped to the frame. Someone who knew it was there had used it. She slowed at the door and looked through the gap before pushing it. The covered walkway was a concrete structure, roof overhead, open on the roadside, running 30 feet along the west face of the building above a service road that was 1 lane wide and currently occupied by a single vehicle. Dark, civilian, engine running, headlights off. The walkway lights were motion activated and currently on, which meant someone had triggered them recently enough that they hadn't cycled off. She saw Tanner first. He was on the walkway, standing with his back against the building wall, which was the posture of someone who had been directed to stand there and was complying because the person directing him had something in his hand that made compliance the better option. Tanner was Pharaoh's lead escort, the tall one, the one who had taken a half step into the trauma bay 7 hours ago. He was large and trained and currently doing nothing, which meant the threat level was real. She saw Scarrick second. He was standing at the walkway railing 6 feet from Tanner, with the specific stillness of a man who has spent a long career being the person in a room with the most information and has not yet stopped believing that gives him an advantage. He was 60, maybe 62, broad through the shoulders in the way of someone who had been physically large his whole life and had let it soften in the years since it was operationally required. He was holding a phone, not a weapon, and Mara registered that specific detail and held it because it mattered. In his other hand was the drive. Not a weapon. An object. She also registered in the same 3-second inventory that the vehicle below had 2 people in it, driver and passenger, visible through the windshield, and that the passenger had the door partially open and 1 foot on the running board. Scarrick had not seen her yet. The door opened away from his sightline. She stepped onto the walkway. He saw her when she was 8 feet away. His face did something. Not surprise exactly, but the recalibration of someone whose operational picture has just included a variable he hadn't accounted for. He looked at her for a moment, and then he looked at the door behind her. and he understood that she had not come through it alone. He did not move. She stopped 5 feet from him. She looked at the drive in his hand. She looked at his face. "You know who I am," she said. Not a question. "I know who you were," he said. His voice was what she had expected, measured, the kind of baritones that came from years of being listened to in rooms. Maravos, formerly Sergeant First Class Maravos, Army Combat Medic, call sign Valkyrie. Cavern Operation, 2000 and... "I know my own record," she said. He stopped. "The drive," she said. He looked at it. Something moved across his face, not quite contempt, but the older cousin of it. "You understand what's on this. You understand the scope of what it disrupts. I understand that you built a procurement network that funneled money through military medical contracts for 11 years and used your personnel authority to place people where they'd be useful or silent." She kept her voice flat. "And I understand that when this drive became a problem, you sent 4 people through a maintenance corridor into a recovery ward with a post-surgical patient in it. I sent people to retrieve property. You sent people into a hospital," she said, "into a recovery ward, into a room where a man with a repaired pericardium and a blood pressure of 91/60 was lying in a bed." She said it plainly. No heat in it, just the fact of it, stated out loud in the specific way that facts become harder to manage when they stop being abstract. Something shifted in Skerrick's face. Not guilt. She did not think he was capable of guilt in the way the word usually meant. But the specific discomfort of a man who has spent a career operating at a level where consequences stay institutional and has been brought into contact with what those consequences looked like on a gurney. "You placed me here," she said, 2 years ago. "You used Weston to sign the transfer request, and you put me at this facility and this posting because you wanted me somewhere that used me up without using me." He said nothing. "You knew what I knew about the Cavern operation. You knew I was the one person who could have disrupted the investigation closure if anyone had asked me the right questions. And instead of asking me the right questions, you put me in a position where nobody was going to ask me anything at all." She paused. "You put me under Marcus Trent." At Trent's name, something crossed Skerrick's face. The flicker of a man who has just been reminded of the weakest link in a chain and the fact that the link is now in county custody. She saw it. "He's already talking," she said. "Not as cruelty, as information. You know that. That's why you're on this walkway at 4 in the morning with a drive you can't use and a vehicle you can't get to anymore." She looked at the vehicle below. She looked at the passenger with the open door. "Your extraction plan had a timing window," she said. "The window is closed." As she said it, the walkway door opened behind her and Solis came through with 2 of her team, simultaneously. And she heard this rather than saw it, the sound of vehicles on the service road approaching from the north. The base security response reached the west perimeter. The lights below came on. 2 vehicles, headlights bright, pulling into the service road from both directions and boxing the civilian car between them. The passenger with the open door looked down at the approaching lights. He pulled his foot back in and closed the door. The vehicle did not move. Skerrick looked at the scene below. He looked at Solis. He looked at Mara. His face did the thing that faces do when the last calculation resolves and the answer is not what you needed it to be. It was not dramatic. It was small and quiet and entirely internal. A man who had spent 40 years being the one who controlled the board, acknowledging that the board was no longer his. He held the drive out toward Solis. She stepped forward and took it. He said nothing when the handcuffs went on. He looked at the service road, at the lights, at the personnel moving into position below, and his face stayed controlled in the way that it would stay controlled because that was what he had. Composure was the last thing left when everything else was gone. He was walked back through the exterior door and into the administrative corridor, and Mara watched him go, and she did not feel the thing she had expected to feel. She felt tired. Not the adrenaline-flat tired that came after a physical situation. She had felt that already and moved through it. This was something older, the tired of a weight that had been on for so long that its removal was, before anything else, just strange. Solis came to stand beside her at the railing. Below them, the 2 base security vehicles had the civilian car bracketed, and personnel were at the doors. From this angle, you could see the service road light pooling on the concrete and the thin line of pre-dawn dark above the tree line to the east. "Tanner," Mara said. "I'm fine," Tanner said from behind her. She turned. He was standing against the wall where Skerrick had directed him, and his face had the expression of a large, competent man who has spent 20 minutes being held in place by a 60-year-old with leverage and is not processing the experience with complete equanimity. The drive is intact? Solis has it, Mara said. He exhaled. It was not a composed exhale. Good, good, okay. He straightened from the wall. I need to check on the commander. His pressure is 97/66. He's okay. She looked at him. Go. He went through the door. Solis was on the phone. Mara stayed at the railing. She stayed there for 3 minutes, which was long enough for the service road situation to resolve and the personnel below to shift from tactical to procedural, and long enough for the sky above the tree line to shift from black to the specific dark blue that came before dawn without quite being dawn. She stood with her hands on the concrete railing and her shoulder aching steadily, and the specific quality of a night that had consumed 7 hours in what felt like 2, and was now arriving at its edge. She thought about Cavern, not about the operation itself. She had spent 18 months thinking about the operation. She thought about the meeting room at the base where the investigation had been conducted, the 3 officers across the table from her, the questions that had not been the right questions, and the way the closure had felt when it came. Not like relief, not like vindication, just like a door being shut very firmly from the outside. She had carried that door for 2 years. She had carried it into blue scrubs and 12-hour shifts, and the deliberate plainness of a life designed to ask nothing of anyone. She thought about what Pharaoh had said. You were never wrong about Cavern. She thought about the 4 people who had died and the families they had left, and the fact that the wrong question at the right time had never been asked of her, and the fact that nothing she was feeling tonight would change any of that. The door could be opened now. The file was being reopened by people with the right authority and the right material. Vorst had 14 months of corroborating records, and Trent was in county custody, and Skerrick was in handcuffs, and the drive was in Solis's hand. The door could be opened, but the 4 people were still gone. She stayed with that for a moment, not punishing herself with it, not the way she had for 18 months, just acknowledging it. The difference between guilt and grief was something she had spent 2 years confusing, and standing on the walkway in the pre-dawn of a night that had finally finished its worst work, she could feel them separate for the first time into distinct things. Grief she could carry. Guilt that wasn't hers was a different kind of weight entirely. Solis ended her call and came back to the railing. She stood beside Mara for a moment without speaking, which was, Mara thought, one of the more useful things about her. Base Command is bringing in a federal liaison team, Solis said. They'll want formal statements from everyone involved, starting at 6 a.m. She paused. That gives you about an hour and a half. To do what? To do whatever you need to do before it becomes a very long day. Mara looked at the tree line. The Cavern reinvestigation. Formally reopened 2 months ago. The new findings are complete. The 3 analysts' reports are signed. Solis's voice was even. What tonight has added is the connection between Weston's closure and Skerrick's network, which will be formally documented and attached to the existing file. She paused. Your record is going to be corrected, not as a courtesy, as a finding of fact. When? The documentation will be processed through the formal channel, weeks, not months. She paused again, and this pause had something in it. But I can tell you now, officially, as the officer who pulled your file and has read the Cavern reinvestigation and is standing here having watched what you did tonight, the record is wrong, has been wrong, and the people responsible for making it wrong are in custody or under active investigation. She looked at Mara directly. That's not a bureaucratic formality. That's the truth. Mara said nothing for a moment. Then, Cavern, the 4 people who died. Yes. Their families were told it was an operational error, a planning failure. Yes. That needs to be corrected too. Solis looked at her. That process is more complicated. I know it is. Mara's voice was quiet and very steady. But it needs to happen, whatever the complications are. Those families have been carrying a version of events that was constructed to protect a network. They deserve the real version, she paused. That's part of the reinvestigation. It will be, Solis said. I'll make sure of it personally. Mara nodded once. Below, the service road was quieting. The civilian vehicle was being processed. The first gray light of actual dawn was beginning to differentiate the tree line from the sky. Somewhere inside the building, a shift change was beginning. The 6 a.m. staff arriving, the overnight staff giving handoff, the hospital recommencing its ordinary operations in the middle of an extraordinary situation that most of them would learn about gradually over the course of the next several days. "There's something else," Solis said. Mara looked at her. "I've been authorized to offer you a formal reinstatement pathway, if you want it." She said it carefully, not as a pitch, not as a recruitment speech, just the information. Not a field posting, a joint trauma instruction role, working with combat medic training programs across 3 bases, developing protocol for field surgical response in forward environments. You'd be based here, or wherever you choose. You'd continue your medical work alongside the instruction mandate. She paused. It's a new position. It didn't exist before tonight. Someone in base command created it about 40 minutes ago based on a phone call from Colonel Adrian Solis. Mara looked at her. "You don't have to decide now," Solis said, "or ever. The file correction happens regardless. The reinstatement offer is separate." She paused. "But I wanted you to have it." Mara looked back at the tree line. She thought about what it meant to be offered a door after spending 2 years on the wrong side of a closed one. She thought about the difference between returning and just moving forward, and whether those were actually different things, or whether the distinction was something she had invented to make the last 2 years feel more like a choice than a sentence. She thought about 12-hour shifts and blue scrubs, and the specific loneliness of being very good at something in a room where nobody knew it, and nobody was going to know it, and that was the design. She thought about Pharaoh in the trauma bay, gray and bleeding, and saying one word that she had not been able to ignore. She had not ignored it. That mattered. "I need to check on my patient," she said. "Of course," Solis said. She went back through the exterior door and down the administrative corridor and into the recovery wing, which was staffed now by Solis's people and Pharaoh's escorts, and the recovered overnight nurse who had emerged from the break room with the cautious expression of someone rejoining a situation they still didn't fully understand. Mara checked the recovery bay chart at the station, confirmed the post-surgical notes were current, then went through the curtain. Pharaoh was awake. His color was the best it had been since he came through the emergency bay doors. His pressure was reading 101/68, which was not normal, but was substantially better than the night had offered at any point, and his heart rate had settled into the low 70s with the steadiness of a repaired system starting to trust itself. He looked like someone who had been awake for 24 hours and had chest surgery in the middle of it and was still, stubbornly, coherent. He looked at her face when she came through the curtain. "Over?" he said. "Skerrick is in custody. Trent is in county. The drive is with Solis." She sat in the chair. "Yes." He exhaled. It was long and slow and had the quality of something very heavy being set down carefully. "Good." He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Good." She checked his drain, still clear, output within normal range. She checked his leads, she checked his temperature and found it a degree higher than she wanted, which was expected for post-surgical at this stage and not alarming. She wrote it in the chart because writing it in the chart was what you did. "You're going to have a low-grade fever for the next 24 hours, she said. "That's the pericardium repair responding to surgical trauma. It's not infection, but I want it watched and I want a temperature log every 4 hours. "Okay," he said, "and you still cannot move without assistance. That's not a suggestion." "I know." "You moved twice tonight when I told you not to." "I know." He had the look of someone who was not going to argue the point and was possibly even embarrassed about it. "I know. You're right." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about 7 years, about the briefings and the operations, and the way he had always been the person in a room who assessed the situation and then assessed the people and understood the difference. She thought about the call sign he had said in the trauma bay, and the specific quality of trust it had taken to say it out loud in a room full of people who didn't know what it meant, trusting that she was still there underneath the 2 years of carefully constructed distance. She had been. That was the thing she had not known until tonight. She had not known whether the person she used to be was still present, or whether 2 years of deliberate suppression had actually worked. She had been afraid it had worked. Afraid and also hoping, in the contradictory way of people who have hurt themselves with who they are and are not sure how to separate the skill from the wound. It hadn't worked. She was still there. All of her. Hands that didn't shake when it mattered, and a mind that tracked the room, and a body that moved the way it had been trained to move, and the part of her that cared about the person on the table. That had never been the military training, that was just hers, that had always been hers before anything else. Solace offered me a role, she said. Pharaoh looked at her. Trauma instruction, joint program. She kept her voice even. Based here. Are you going to take it? She thought about it for a moment, really thought, not the thinking she had done on the walkway, which was feeling her way toward something, but the practical specific thinking of someone identifying what they actually wanted. I think so, she said. I don't know yet. I need to sleep first. He almost smiled. That's the most sensible thing you've said all night. I've said a number of sensible things tonight. You've also taken down 4 armed people with hospital equipment and diagnosed a cardiac tamponade in under 2 minutes. He paused. Also sensible, but different. She stood. Sleep, she said. When the morning team comes in, Dr. Holloway is going to want to review the surgical notes and the pericardial drain output. Tell him everything. Don't minimize. I don't minimize. You described your breathing as hurts when what you meant was significant post-surgical pain in the thoracic cavity. That's minimizing. He looked at her with the expression of a man who is choosing not to argue because the person arguing is technically correct. Okay. I'll check on you before I go off shift. She moved toward the curtain. Don't move. Mara. She stopped. Thank you, he said. Not the way people said thank you when they meant it for a specific thing. The way people said it when the specific thing was too large to name exactly. She held that for a moment. Get some sleep, Dex, she said. She let the curtain fall. The shift change at 6 a.m. brought in 12 staff members who entered a hospital that looked, from the outside, entirely like itself, and was, from the inside, occupied by a federal security team. 4 secured individuals in various stages of processing, a base command liaison, a DIA counterintelligence officer who was not quite under arrest and not quite free, and a recovered SEAL commander in the post-surgical bay with a blood pressure that was finally, trending toward something his body could sustain. Donna Falk arrived at 5:58, which was 2 minutes early, which was Donna. She looked at the administrative corridor and the uniformed personnel and the laptops set up at the nurses' station and the general texture of a situation that had resolved but not yet cleaned up. And she looked at Mara, who was charting the last of the overnight notes at the station. Do I want to know? No, Donna said. Probably not all at once, Mara said. Donna set down her bag. She looked at the chart. She looked at Mara's shoulder, which was holding at the painful end of functional and was visible in the way she was carrying her arm. You're hurt. Strained. I'll get it looked at. You'll get it looked at now. Donna, you've been on shift for 9 hours and your shoulder is compensating and you're not walking out of here without someone looking at it. Her voice was the voice of a woman who has been the charge nurse for 11 years and has the particular authority of someone whose job it is to notice what everyone else is managing to ignore. Sit down. Mara sat down. Donna assessed the shoulder with the brisk, no-nonsense hands of an experienced nurse who is not interested in hearing that it's fine, and confirmed soft tissue strain, recommended ice and rest, and an imaging consult if it hadn't improved in 48 hours, and said nothing about what she had clearly already pieced together from the state of the recovery wing and the administrative corridor and the federal personnel eating food from the vending machines. She said one thing when she finished. The SEAL commander, she said. Is he going to be okay? Yes, Mara said. His pressure is good. The repair held. She paused. He's going to be okay. Donna nodded. Good. She looked at Mara for a moment, a full look, the kind that nurses gave each other when something significant had happened, and the professional language wasn't quite enough for it. Go home, she said. Sleep. I have statements at 6. At 6:30. Solis pushed it. Donna handed her a cold pack from the station supplies. Hold that on your shoulder and go find some coffee. Mara found coffee in the physician's lounge, the lounge that still had Marcus Trent's jacket on the chair and his phone on the table, and the particular stale quality of a room that a person had left in a hurry. She stood at the window with the coffee and the cold pack against her shoulder and watched the base wake up outside, the parking structure lights cycling off as the daylight came in. The first vehicles of the morning shift moving through the lots. An ordinary Tuesday beginning its ordinary operations, completely unaware that the building behind it had spent 7 hours being something other than a hospital. She thought about Marcus Trent. Not with anger, She had examined the anger earlier and found it wasn't the dominant thing. She thought about what Vorst had said. He needed money, and someone offered him a clean way to take it and keep taking it. She thought about 11 years of a man who had never quite achieved what he thought he was going to achieve, who had decorated himself with a military record and an administrative title and a consistent practiced contempt for the people under him, because contempt was the easiest way to feel larger than the space he was actually occupying. She thought about the 2 years of it, the ways he had told her, in small daily repetitions, that her judgment didn't count, that her skills were below the threshold, that whatever she brought to a room should be done more quietly or not at all. She thought about how much of that she had absorbed without questioning it, because she had come to this posting already carrying 18 months of being told that her worst day was her own fault, and a man who continued that message in a different key was something her exhausted system had simply incorporated. That had been the design. That was the part that sat in her chest with a particular kind of weight. Not the operational pieces, not the access card, or the procurement chain, or the 4 men in the recovery wing. The design. The deliberate placement of a person who had been made to feel responsible for something she didn't do, into a position under a man who would reinforce that feeling every day, watched over by a retired general who had arranged the whole architecture and then gone back to his house in his retirement and let it run. She had been placed in a cage that used her own exhaustion as the lock. She had been in it for 2 years, and she had opened it herself. Not because someone came to tell her who she was, not because someone handed her the right file or the right authority or the right permission. She had opened it because Dex Farrow said one word in a trauma bay, and she had not been able to stay inside the cage anymore. And the person she actually was had come through the gap and kept going. That was the thing nobody had accounted for. Not Weston, not Scarrick, not the person who had told Scarrick where to put her. None of them had accounted for the possibility that 2 years of suppression might not actually suppress anything. That the skills and the instincts and the specific kind of care she brought to a room were not strategic assets that could be managed by keeping them underemployed. They were just her. They were just what she was. And what she was had not cooperated with the plan to diminish it. She drank her coffee and held that thought until it settled into something she could carry forward, rather than something that sat in her chest sideways. The formal statements began at 6:30 in the administrative conference room, which had been commandeered by the Federal Liaison Team and set up with recording equipment and 3 people from Base Command who had the look of people who had been on call since 3 in the morning and were running on professionalism alone. Mara sat across from them with her shoulder aching and her coffee cup empty and told them what had happened, in order, without editorializing. She was precise. She was complete. She did not speculate about things she couldn't confirm, and she did not soften the things she could. When they asked about the 4 individuals she had been physically involved in subduing, she described what she had done and why she had done it and with what. And the federal liaison across from her wrote it down with the expression of someone incorporating information into a legal framework that was going to have a very specific kind of shape for several years. When they asked about Scarrick on the walkway, she told them what he had said and what she had said, and the sequence of it. When they asked about Marcus Trent, she told them about the access card swipe, and the transfer request, and the 11 years of procurement contracts, all of which she had pieced together from what Vorst and Solis had told her, and she said clearly which parts were her direct knowledge and which parts were reported to her, because that distinction mattered, and she was not going to blur it. She was in the conference room for 2 hours. When she came out, Vorst was waiting in the corridor. I was not in a holding room anymore. He was standing in the corridor with a laptop bag over his shoulder and the look of someone who has just come out of a very long statement of his own and has not yet decided whether to feel relieved or flattened. He looked at her when she came out, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "Your parallel record," she said. "Being formally transferred to the federal case file," he said. "All of it, 14 months. They know you ran an undisclosed track." "Yes." His voice was even. "There are going to be professional consequences for the methodology. I knew there would be." He paused. "The alternative was letting the procurement network run another cycle while I waited for authorization." He paused again. "I couldn't do that." She looked at him. She thought about the thing he had said in the corridor. "I've been building toward this for 14 months. She thought about standing in a building alone with a long piece of work that nobody else knew about, doing it anyway. And she thought that she understood that specific kind of stubbornness perhaps better than most. "The name," she said. The person who told Skerrick where to put me. Is it in your records? He held her gaze for a moment. It's in the procurement chain, the contract authorization sequence. He paused. It's a name you won't know. A civilian contractor with deep access to the personnel recommendation system. He was the technical mechanism. He paused again. Skerrick was the authority. The contractor was the implementation. Both names are in the record. Will they be prosecuted? That's going to take time, he said. But yes. He said it with the quiet certainty of someone who has spent 14 months making sure the answer to that question would be yes. She nodded. She was going to have to live with that's going to take time. That was the gap between the way stories resolved and the way actual legal processes moved, and she had always known it, and it was still the part that required the most deliberate effort to accept. Justice moved at the speed of evidence and process and the availability of people to process it, and she had spent enough of her life in institutional frameworks to know that the outcome being correct did not mean the timeline was satisfying. But Skerrick was in custody. Trent was in custody. The 4 men from the recovery wing were in federal processing. Weston was under investigation. The drive was with Solis, corroborated by Vorst's parallel records, and the formal statements from this morning and the Kavrin reinvestigation file that was already signed. It was enough. Not everything. Not all at once. But enough. Good luck, she said to Vorst. You too, he said. She walked down the corridor and out of the administrative wing and into the main hospital corridor, which was in full morning operation now. Staff moving, the breakfast service smell coming from the cafeteria, 2 orderlies with a supply cart, a physician she didn't recognize doing rounds with a medical student who was taking too many notes. The ordinary texture of a hospital morning, 12 hours after the most unordinary night this facility had seen in its 11-year history. She passed the trauma bay. She stopped outside it for a moment. The bay was clean, reset, restocked, ready for the next emergency. The ultrasound probe back in its dock. The supply cart organized. No residue of 7 hours ago except a slight gap in the gauze inventory that she had noted on the restock form she had filled out at 11:30 p.m. last night, 100 years ago. She looked at the bay. She thought about the moment she had reached for the ultrasound probe and moved to Pharaoh's left side and done the thing she had been trained to do, in the room where she had been told she had no business doing it. She thought about Trent's face when the monitor started climbing. She thought about Holloway's voice. Do it! She thought about the transport medic beside her, holding the probe, breathing through his nose. She had not hesitated. That was the thing she kept coming back to. In the moment itself, there had been no calculation about whether to act, no weighing of the professional risk against the outcome, no version of the thought that had become her default setting for 2 years. Stay small, stay quiet, let someone else carry it. There had been only the clinical picture in front of her and the knowledge of what needed to happen and the hands that knew how to make it happen. She had not hesitated, which meant that whatever the last 2 years had done, they had not done the one thing that had been intended. The thing underneath had stayed intact. She understood something, standing outside the trauma bay in the first full daylight of an exhausted morning. She understood that the people who had tried to contain her, who had managed her posting and maintained her obscurity and built a supervisory relationship designed to make her doubt her own judgment, had been trying to solve a problem that was not actually solvable. The problem being that a person's capacity is not a resource that depletes when it's ignored. It is simply a resource that waits. She had waited, and then she had not. She had a lot of life ahead of her in which she was not going to do that again. She went back to the recovery wing one more time before she left. Pharaoh was asleep. His pressure was reading 104/71, and his temperature had come down a point. And his breathing was the slow, even breathing of a person whose body had finally stopped fighting for the right to continue and had started actually continuing. His face in sleep looked like the face of someone who was in significant pain and was resting anyway, which was the most honest version of recovery. Not comfort, just the body doing its persistent, unglamorous work. She stood in this bay doorway for a moment. She did not go in. She looked at the monitor numbers one more time. All of them, in order, the full picture. And she filed them in the way she always filed a patient status when she was going off shift, with the specific clarity of someone who knows the work is being handed to capable hands and can set it down. She set it down. She went to the locker room and changed out of her scrubs and into the civilian clothes she had arrived in 19 hours ago, and she looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. not the way she had looked at her reflection in the darkened window at 1:52 a.m., looking for the edge of something she hadn't known was already in motion. She looked at herself the way you look at someone you have spent a long time not quite seeing. She looked tired. Her shoulder was wrong. There was a bruise beginning on her left forearm from a grip she had broken in the recovery wing and hadn't thought about since. She looked like someone who had been in a very long night and had come out the other side of it. She looked like herself. She picked up her bag and walked out of the hospital into the morning. The day had fully arrived by the time she reached the parking lot. Real light, pale blue, the specific quality of early morning on a military base, where the operational schedule had already been running for 2 hours, and the world looked purposeful and indifferent to the night that had just occurred. She stood beside her car for a moment with her keys in her hand. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unrecognized number. She looked at it. Reinstatement paperwork initiated as of 0700. Formal offer will follow in writing. As. She read it twice. She looked at the hospital behind her, at the trauma bay entrance with its red emergency signage, at the base beyond the perimeter fence, the buildings and the flags and the ordered infrastructure of a place that was not uncomplicated but was, at its core, composed of people trying to keep other people alive. She had spent her adult life inside that effort, from the first training that showed her what she was capable of, to the classified operations that had required every version of that capacity, to the 2 years of blue scrubs and deliberately small footprints and a clipboard she had used to inventory gauze when she should have been teaching people how not to lose patience. She was not going to disappear again. Not because disappearing hadn't served a purpose. It had, or at least it had felt like it did, which was close enough to the same thing for a person in that amount of pain. Not because the last 2 years were wasted. They weren't. She had learned the specific texture of being underestimated, and she carried it now as something useful, the knowledge that a quiet person with invisible skills in the corner of a room is not an absence, is not a nothing, is sometimes the only reason the room stays intact. She was going to take the role. She was going to teach people how to keep other people alive under the worst conditions they could face, and she was going to do it from a building she had spent 2 years learning from the inside. And she was going to do it as the person whose name was about to be formally corrected in a federal file after 4 years of being assigned the wrong story. She was not going to be small again. Not out of anger, not as a correction, but simply because she understood now, in a way she hadn't before, that smallness had never been protection. It had been the thing she was kept in. And the night had made it very clear that the cage was not hers. She got in the car. She drove off base in the early morning light, towards sleep and an ice pack, and the specific quiet of a day that had nothing scheduled in it, and she drove the way she had learned to drive on base roads, attentive, both hands, watching the mirrors, watching what was behind her as well as what was ahead. For the first time in a very long time, what was behind her was smaller than what was in front. That was enough. That was in fact more than enough. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is refuse to stay reduced, not loudly, not with a speech or a declaration or a dramatic turn toward the light. Just the quiet, daily, costly decision to keep bringing the fullness of who you are into rooms that were designed to make you forget you had it. Until the night arrives when the room needs exactly that, and you don't hesitate, and the work speaks for itself. And the people who told you that you were less than you were have to sit with what it looks like when they're wrong. That is not a story about luck. That is a story about what survives.